You're listening to an audio resource from Redemption Hill Church. This resource is not meant to be a replacement for participation at a local church, but an accessory to the care you're receiving from your own pastors. To learn more about Redemption Hill Church or to give to our ministry, visit redemptionhilldsm.org.
2022 is almost up, and we have a lot of hot takes to go through. You're listening to Cornfield Theology. Hey everyone, Pastor Sean here, pastor of Redemption Hill Church, located in the Des Moines Metro. Back at you. It's been a while with a podcast. Thanks for joining. Thanks for listening. Whether you watch it on YouTube, make sure you like, share, do all the relevant things. 5 stars in Apple Podcasts. And man, we're here today to talk about all the hot takes. We are here to get in trouble. I'm here to get in trouble with somebody at some point. And my friend here, Jacob Young, is here to get in trouble as well, as we are going down the path that we shouldn't go, but we're going. We're going to talk about all the hot takes that Twittersphere will talk about, you know, in their 2-line quips. But we're going to hopefully do it with a little more substance than that. So, Jacob, how you doing?
Good, man. It's good to be with you today.
Yeah, and you've been on before. I think we've done 2 or 3 podcasts together.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, give the bio. Where are you from? Where do you pastor?
Sure. So I pastor King's Cross Church. I'm one of the pastors here at King's Cross Church here in Manchester, New Hampshire. And we are an urban church where our church meets in a recovery center, addiction recovery center in our neighborhood. And we're the largest city north of Boston. So we're a bit of urban and a bit of kind of rural mixed together here in the city. And we've been here for a little over 8 years now. We planted eight or so years ago. And
yeah.
I grew up military, so this is not where I'm originally from, but I'm generally American, and it's where I feel most at home.
America.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
we have some points of overlap. One, we're both planted churches. Redemption Hill has been around for about 4.5 years now, and we're both part of Trinity Fellowship churches, so we're part of the same denomination. So kind of a point of contact and point of reference for anyone who's listening and watching. And I want to add this before we get into the substance of this podcast. I think it's fair to say there's a lot of commonality that we have. I think our denominational connection shows that we have a lot of commonality. But I would also say there are areas where we see things differently. We may hold to a same theological point, but we come to different applications. And I find that really refreshing. And that's one of the reasons why I do enjoy you having on this podcast, because, one, it gets me out of my silo, right? And 2, hopefully it creates for a good discussion on specific issues that we're going to get into today. I would imagine, Jacob, I'm just kind of projecting here, we're going to talk through some of these hot takes and they land on us a little differently, right?
Sure. Yeah. I think that's the beauty of confessionalism, right? I mean, we have, you might call them the bowling alley safeties up, and we're kind of rolling the balls differently in how we think through things.
Yeah, I'm taking the bowling ball and I'm like chucking it like a shot put. And you got the nice form. And mine's going clunk, 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 clunk. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a nice hook on the end of mine. So
yeah, and I can't bowl with crap. So we have an outline we're going to follow, but all these hot takes that we can go to. Twitter is a great place to find the debauchery.
Throw the first
takes.
one out, man.
Well, before I get that, let's I have a thread of guys that we interact with. Logan,
okay.
The guy named Brooks, Eric McIntyre. And I just simply asked, hey guys, what are your hot takes for the year? So we're not going to be covering this, but here's a quick list for you. Married women should wear head coverings when publicly praying or prophesying. You want to touch that one?
Wrong. Yeah, I want to touch that one.
Work out your salvation.
That's a wrong idea.
Work out your salvation in Philippians 2 is probably not referring to your individual salvation, but the health of the church. Here's another one. I'm not saying who's throwing this down. Singleness.
That one's probably right.
Yeah, that was actually pretty good. Singleness isn't a gift, and we should be more careful with how we care for and encourage single people. Jeez.
Yeah. I've always talked about celibacy being the gift, not singleness. So There you go.
The tripart division of the law is an unbiblical hermeneutic. Now I disagree with that one. You might agree.
That's dead wrong.
Yeah.
Oh no. That's
you tripartite?
I'm Calvin on that. Oh yeah, bro, that guy's wrong. Whoever said that, dead wrong. He should be going to, dude. He should be sitting at the faraway table, uncool table,
Yeah.
in the cafeteria.
He and I disagree on this one. This is Brooks, and we've done a podcast on that, so I'll point this one out on him. The Son is eternally, functionally subordinate to the Father.
Dead wrong, bro. I hate that stuff. Get that
And
out
we-
of here.
And this is one I agree with. We should be taking communion every Sunday.
Well, we do that, so yeah, sure.
How about this one? Chick-fil-A will be served in heaven.
Well, I guess the question would be: is there the, for lack of a better term, murder of animals in heaven?
Yeah, that's the question. Can we get to the correct? We used to have chickens. Am I dressing down my chicken or not and serving it up for a meal? Or are we going pre?
Yeah, I don't know. I find that one. I mean, I understand the premise that Chick-fil-A is great. However, I will say that since Chick-fil-A is closed on the Sabbath,
Yeah.
and therefore heaven is the eternal Sabbath,
Yeah.
they'll be eternally closed.
That's right. No Chick-fil-A. No Chick-fil-A in heaven.
Yeah.
I got a couple more for you. Just quick Twitch reaction.
Okay.
Christians generally shouldn't be suing one another, and we should be teaching them that they shouldn't sue one another.
Too broad a statement, and often justice is pursued by civil lawsuits.
One more that came from today, or yesterday. That actually I'm a little. I got my rock as a rock in my shoe on this one. Sam Storms. You see what he came up with? I mean, he wrote an article, so I have no problem saying his name. A complementary.
I don't keep up with anything.
A complementarian case for women as pastors. That title doesn't even make sense to me. I mean, I know what he's saying, but I'm just kind of like, I'm sorry, I don't see it.
Yeah, I could probably roll with that one for a little bit. That's probably where some of our differences. I wouldn't see them as elders, but if you want to do that, man, whatever.
Well, maybe let's start there just for fun. So that's that's the argument he makes in his article. To be fair, I mean, if I want to give his article justice, he's parsing out what is a pastor, what is an elder, what is an office in the church.
Mm-hmm.
And my take, which you're familiar with, and a lot of people listening might be familiar with, is that elder pastor are synonymous in the New Testament in particular. Therefore, we shouldn't be parsing out like, here's your elder board or whatever over here, and now we're pastoring over here. Now, what I will say in light of all that, is there a general sense in which as members we are pastoring one another, we're caring for one another? Sure, yeah. Our community groups are a reflection of that. How we fellowship is a reflection of that. But I don't agree with the take that really was kicked off in Anaheim at the SBC meeting. I don't know if it was this year or the year before, where they set out some type of commission to do this study, as if all of a sudden our hermeneutic had changed over the last 2,000 plus years. I'm just kind of like, what happened? So I'm not with Sam Storms on that. He doesn't talk about the real issue is where does authority lie in his article. At least I don't think so. So I think his article is deeply flawed and filled with a bunch of arguments from silence. I'm sure you agree.
No, I did not read his article. So I think I would kind of say something along the lines that elder is a gendered term. I don't mean grammatically. I mean in terms of function, it's a gendered term, kind of like husband, where it presumes or includes the masculine component and is limited to that. There are a lot of ways in which you see women function with the leadership and care within the New Testament. I mean, some of the chief examples, honestly, are that women are the first to proclaim or preach the risen Christ to the apostles. I'm not sure that I would hang my hat on that as a direct line for giving women the title of pastor.
Right.
But I think that kind of points to I would probably say that is probably more what works best for a local congregation in their circumstances. I wouldn't agree with women elders. Do I think churches that have women elders are believers and have the Spirit? Yes. And so they are, by my reading churches. Are they healthy or unhealthy? I'm not sure that's going to, whether they have women pastors or not, determines the health of a church. So I'm probably going to be a little bit more hands off and libertarian on that in terms of, yeah, I work with women pastors here in our city. I don't have a dog in that fight to manage them or that situation. So that tends to be where I would land. It's not something that I would do, but I'm always I probably listen to a little bit too much Rage Against the Machine to have too strong an opinion.
Sure. Oh, that's out of you.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can move on from that, but I don't see it biblically. And when I'm talking in ideals, so if we had to pursue the greatest ideal, what Scripture teaches, I just can't get there.
Sure.
Biblically speaking and historically speaking. So I think there's a lot of pressure to move in that direction, especially in the circles that we've historically run in, the evangelical, and we don't like that word, but we're using it for the sake of argument.
Well, and then, yeah, I guess to me, that's where it's like, look, I wouldn't do it. I have good reasons for not doing it. There's a history within the church and interpretation for reasons to not do it. But I would want to be careful on how I couched it so that women that do have leadership gifts and are being significantly used by the Lord to steward those gifts in service to the church don't feel like I'm now becoming their enemy or casting stones at them.
And I would agree with you on that.
Yeah, and if we get caught up on titles, it just doesn't the function of discipleship within the New Testament isn't overly concerned with titles. I mean, obviously there are recognition of offices, but even offices are not commented on a lot compared to how much we might want to focus on them. So yeah, I'm just not going to get hung up on that.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I tend to get more hung up on it, I think. I have a rock in my shoe right now, in my boot, and I'm like, I don't like sloppy hermeneutics. And for me personally,
sure,
getting to this point of where, yes, we say yes to women pastors is a sloppy hermeneutic. And the same hermeneutic that you use to get to this point is used to where we've seen the church drift in other areas that we've compromised, whatever, with culture, whatever. And so I'm looking at this more, think of it not more of a practical thing, a practical way of thinking about it. Think more as like a scientific, like these principles exist to help us lead us to proper ends and interpretation. And now we're betraying these very principles that we've been using. And so my beef comes back a little further down the line, upstream, I guess, on the interpretive question. Like, what are the principles here? And so that's where I'm like, hold on,
and I'm not sure I would agree on the. Yeah,
this is
sure
me.
I would agree with.
If you're watching, it's like me getting the rock in my shoe.
Yeah, I'm not sure I would agree with the sloppy hermeneutic charge. There's some well-meaning and well-intended thinkers who are very thorough on their material. That, again, I just don't know. I just don't get paid enough to particularly manage that beyond our own local church.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's fair. Well, let's get to something. Let's talk about American Christianity.
Awesome.
What is the problem in our views with American Christianity? Now, the setup before we get into the details would be this. I think we both have massive concerns with American Christianity, especially in, broadly speaking, the circles we've been in throughout history. Here's where I begin, and then I know you can have thoughts on this as well. I see a constant compromise with the culture. It seems to be more event driven than worship driven, right? Like let's do worship with the smoke machine and the fog light and whatever else have you. I see more entertainment than I do a sincere posture of worship and song, as I think about just worship and song in particular. And I got to ask the question, like how, like when somebody comes into a church service, are they let's say they came from Mars and they're here for the first time, they've walked around the streets of Des Moines or Manchester, and they come to your church, will they see something distinct from the culture?
So if Elon Musk comes to your church, basically,
yeah,
is what you're saying.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
He took his spaceship to Mars. He brought it back. He walked around for a little while.
Yeah.
The Men in
Yeah.
Black thing happened to him, so he's got a fresh mind.
Yeah.
Is he gonna be like, whoa, you guys are doing things a little differently here than it's at
Sure.
Starbucks down the road? And I don't see it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess to me, my kind of changing disposition towards evangelicalism began as we moved into New England to kind of acclimate to the culture here and plant our church, plant the church that God was leading us to plant. And I noticed that the questions that we're wrestling with and the dynamics that they're dealing with, evangelicalism in large writ did not care. And then when we would hold a conference, like Together for the Gospel held a conference back in 2015, shortly after we moved here, 2016, and they brought in, I think it was Truman and not Truman, D.A. Carson and Paul Tripp. They're both great guys.
Yeah.
But they brought them in as the main speakers. And I'm kind of like, bro, I've been here for a year and a half, and I know 20 other pastors here in New England that should be headlining this conference on faithful ministry or whatever it was in New England. These guys don't know anything about New England. I mean, no offense, but 10th Pres, where Tripp was at the time, has no correlation to the context and ministry dynamics that New England rural pastors or metro urban pastors deal with.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that kind of reinforced, even within well-intended circles, that the broad scope of evangelicalism had an agenda and PowerPoint slides to press that did not really come up from within or maturate from the context where they were speaking to, So, I start reading Gospel Coalition stuff and all that, and I'm like, bro, I've got needles on my driveway, and I've got people who don't know if Abraham's in the Old Testament or New Testament. They don't know, what is the Sermon on the Mount or anything like that. And I look at Gospel Coalition and the articles strike me as a very suburban evangelical flavor that just doesn't match anything that I'm dealing with and how to disciple people. So that's where some of my observations started to kind of percolate. And as I've kind of watched the headlines of evangelicalism, it seems to me that evangelicals have an addiction to prominence and power in a way that undermines their ability to actually be faithful to the New Testament message or the Bible message in the whole. So,
yeah, well, this is a point of massive agreement. Yeah. I talk about it like this at our church. There's a celebrity pastor culture, even celebrity theologian culture that is extremely unhealthy. Even if someone isn't seeking after the power, the constant invites to the conferences, being the headline to the main conferences or whatever else have you, is creating that, right? It's cultivating that. And frankly, we're in a context now where local church pastors like you and I are not the main voice and the main shepherd of the people in the pew, because we have YouTube, we have podcasts, we have all these other areas where it's like, oh, I listened to him, he's the best preacher in the world. But I'm like, what, that best preacher in the world, he doesn't know it. He's not going to be at the hospital with you. Yeah. He's not going to be the one, marrying your children, or officiating your children, right? I'm not going to be marrying their children, officiating their children, right? The wedding of their children.
It's going to be a different conversation, bro.
Yeah, talk about hot takes. And I really do have a disdain, might be too strong of a word, but I'm frustrated with the American celebrity pastor culture that has been created. And then what happens is when Pastor A or Pastor B, gets removed from ministry, what that does is discredit all the other pastors, right? It creates doubt of, John and Sally sitting in the pew looking at, you or me or another local church pastor who's just grinding it for the glory of God in that local church. And that's created another unhealthy dynamic, like the rise and fall of, let's use that as an example, the rise and fall of Mars Hill, right? That whole podcast series.
Mm-hmm.
On the one hand, there's a lot that as a pastor I can learn and glean from that. Be like, you know what, these are dangers that we need to be aware of. I can see, something. My wife and I talked about it as we listened to the podcast, and it was really healthy for us. On the other hand, the flip side of that coin is now a lot of people might be suspicious of their local church pastor because of what happened way out in Seattle X number of years ago.
I mean, that's sure. I mean, I imagine that's a possibility. I mean, honestly, to use that podcast as a reference point, it was interesting. I had a non-Christian friend of mine that I do a lot of work with here in the city, through the Recovery Center. He was like, "Yeah, I've been listening to this Rise and Fall of the Mars Hill podcast."
Yeah,
and they talked about how he was a church planter? Yeah, church planter. Yeah, church planter, and how there's a certain level of arrogance and kind of bravado that comes with that. And you're a church planter too. Yeah. Well, I've never experienced that with you. And so
yeah,
there's a
that's
sense
good.
in which I'm not sure how holistic that is in terms of its application to other people. But I would say that with that podcast as a reference point, the danger, I mean, of the myriad of dangers, there's a brand that gets associated with a celebrity.
Right.
And given that we are a consumeristic culture, I want that brand. And I will then select a church based on whether it aligns with that brand or not. That used to be the old, I mean, I'm in Acts 29, in addition to TFC, and that used to be one of the reasons why guys would join Acts 29, get the branding sticker, and then people would join their church because of that brand. And
Yeah, right.
I mean, that's consumerism straight down the line. I mean, that's not malicious consumerism. That brand can be associated with complementarianism or reform theology or missiology of a certain stripe. So that those are fine, and that it helps people to kind of quickly sift data, which is not a bad thing. But when it becomes a brand that then a church has to be measured against, I think that's right through within evangelicalism. And I mean, it's interesting to kind of consider, and I'm not sure how. I haven't done a lot of reading on this in various aspects, but evangelicalism has kind of largely always been on the technological front of changes within technology. I mean, you think about even back to Spurgeon, who I guess would be an evangelical in one way or the other. People were reading his sermons by they were sitting across that wire across the Atlantic, and they were reading his sermons from Sunday on Thursday out in Oklahoma, and so there's a mass spread that evangelicalism has always kind of been very keen and savvy on using technology to spread a brand, positively and negatively.
Yeah, I was gonna say it cuts both ways.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's necessarily bad, but I mean, the shadow side of, for example, that Spurgeon sermon thing is like, you can hold that up and be like, well, why doesn't my pastor preach like Spurgeon? It's like, well, first of all, there's only one Spurgeon, and he's who he was. Secondly, he edited those before they were sent out, so they weren't even
Original.
like what he originally spoke.
Yeah.
He took the transcript and edited that sucker, and then made it better, and then sent it out. It's like, well, that's not fair.
Wish I could do that.
Yeah.
Wish I could take back half of what I said and then send it out.
Yeah, get out all those and you know what I'm saying. And people in our church make fun of me because I'll be like, "Are you with me? You tracking?" And they're like, "Jacob, stop it." I'm like, "I'm just checking, because you guys are all New Englanders. I can't read your faces. You ain't doing nothing." So
same problem in the Midwest.
Yeah. So I think that branding side is, and to the extent that evangelicals align themselves with the brand of toxic elements, it's kind of like, to kind of get into the hot take thing, I find it incredulous that evangelicals would get in bed with Trump for the sake of passing justices through the courts to get pro-life, things overturned or whatever. And meanwhile, they have tainted and corrupted their witness by the mere fact of getting in bed with Trump. It fits the brand. It undermines the witness.
So those close to me know where I'm at on politics, but without getting into politics, you do raise something that I think is a problem. And actually, this goes all directions. It is the politicization of the church, right? And it's not just on the right;
Sure.
it's on the left as
Yeah.
well. It really is.
Oh yeah.
And we've to some degree, and I say we, it's collectively, we've allowed that to happen, right? We've allowed parties to dangle the carrot in front of us, and we're like, okay. And so, for me, I got certain principles where I'm like, a politician will never, I don't care if we're 50 people or 500 or 5,000. We're never going to have a politician. I've been in those churches where the politician comes in and he's basically giving his
doing a
campaign speech.
Yeah, stump speech.
Yeah, exactly. And here in the state of Iowa, we see a lot of politicians, and you're in New Hampshire. So you've seen.
Oh yeah,
well.
we're the first in the nation, man. I mean, this coming summer, it's going to be a party.
No.
They're all going to be here.
You're second in the nation. Iowa's
Yeah,
first.
whatever it is that you guys call it, that's
called the
caucus. What is it, straw poll? Do you guys?
Oh, it's a caucus.
That's not real. That's not real.
It is real.
It's not a real primary.
Really,
No,
actually, yeah. Actually, you know what? The Democrats, you know what they've done now? They've moved Iowa and New Hampshire back because they want to have South Carolina and Texas, I think, first.
So, if you're, again, speaking of Twitter, I've only begun to use Twitter really for like New Hampshire politics and music stuff. And New Hampshire politicians are all up in a storm about this. They're all, it's the problem that they're going to face with that is that it's in our state constitution that we're the first in the nation.
Yeah, first prime.
So whatever they choose, we're gonna be the first.
You're not the first. You're not the first. You're the second. Golly.
Bro, it's like saying that you're the real first is like saying the texting related to the first date is the first date. That text message is not the first date. The date going out is the first date.
Well, I tell you what, New Hampshire should be angry with Iowa, at least when from the Democratic side, because it was in the last presidential election where the Iowa Democratic Party absolutely botched the counting of the primary votes. And like CNN, MSNBC, and Fox are like, Iowa, Democratic Party, you had one job.
Yeah.
You had one stupid job.
I know.
And you messed it
I remember that. I know. Was it Buttigieg, wherever it was, that was supposed to be the winner, and we didn't know even going into when we were doing our primary. Anyhow.
And no one was like voter fraud. It was just mere incompetence.
Yeah. Yeah. So.
Anyway,
get us back on track, Sean.
Yeah. Anything else on American Christianity that just that you're bugged by?
Well, I think to the culture thing that you were talking about, I step back, and for me, one of the dynamics or the founding principle that I think through is when the resurrected Christ stands on the hill outside of Jerusalem and says, "All authority on heaven and earth has been given to me." There's no like exception clause. The resurrection changes the fundamental metaphysics of the world, and he now stands over the world, shepherding it towards his renewed kingdom. And that means even cultural dynamics that don't honor him or reflect him are still under his stewardship. So, for example, when I see the evangelical struggle or addiction to power and fame and celebrity and all of that stuff, and the atrocious ways in which it's been used to cover up sexual abuse or to enable toxic leaders or anything like that, I see that also reflected in the culture around us. And I see within that Christ guiding the nations towards addressing that issue. So I don't take as strongly a negative view towards culture as you do, because I see them as a litmus test for how is Christ working out the redemption of the world towards his coming kingdom, or the realization of his kingdom.
So a realization of his kingdom, your post-mill posture here.
Yeah. I tend to be cautiously optimistic, on-mill, post-millennial, chasing post-mill. So I'm not the triumphalistic like the Moscow guys and all that stuff. Like that stuff is no thanks.
So the wind's blowing from the north today here in the state of Iowa, which means I'm a more post mill these days. And I am optimistic. My optimism though is not with cultures, with what Christ is doing in the church. And I can say, Christ owns every square inch, over the entire
Yeah,
universe, right? I'm 100% behind that. My optimism though is placed. I'm not saying you're placing it in culture. I'm saying my optimism is squarely placed in what God is doing in and through the church to not only spiritually renew
sure,
the world, but to bring about the realities of the kingdom of God here on earth.
sure. And that's where I'm not saying that I'm like a wholehearted like, yeah, it's great. I would say, whether it's the gender sexuality stuff or the power stuff that's going on
Yeah.
in our culture, those are Christ tilling up the ground to expose the reality of the world around us with invitations for us to participate
Yeah.
in what he is doing. And my postmillennial perspective is that each sphere of life will then be inhabited by people who embody repentance and faith, the
Mm-hmm.
two steps that Calvin talks about of the life of Christ, of the life of the Christian. And so it's not that we're going to have a Christian nation or anything like that, but that those things are inhabited by people who are walking in repentance and faith, seeking the righteousness of Christ.
Yeah. My guess
So,
is and we'll move on to the next hot take here, but my guess is if we continue to talk about this in particular, the outworking of our
uh-huh.
eschatology, I actually think we're pretty close in agreement.
Hmm.
I think we're just maybe nuancing it or replacing emphases on different areas. Um,
Sure.
and you mentioned Christian nationalism, which everyone just got triggered who's listening to this right now. Like, are they going to talk about Christian
I didn't
nationalism?
say Christian national.
Oh,
Yeah.
Christian nation. You said Christian nation.
Yeah, Christian nation. I didn't say Christian
Yeah.
nationalism, but I think that that's atrocious as well. So if I'm just going to make anybody mad, they can just know I think that Christian nationalism is atrocious.
We're going
So,
to discuss that on another day. Not because I disagree with you, although I wouldn't articulate it like that. I think right now there's a cultural discussion within our circles of Christianity about that with Stephen Wolf's book, "The Case for Christian Nationalism." And
right.
I read lots of things, so that's my disclaimer. I've read things that are people would deem liberal, crazy, and conservative. I am slowly reading through that, not because I'm throwing myself into that corner, but because I'm trying to understand the argument. And
Right.
there are some holes in his argument. I mean, there's always points of agreement when you read a lot of more. If you're conservative and you
Well,
read something conservative, you'll find points of agreement. But there's areas where I'm kind of like, I don't agree with that, that, and that.
well, I guess to me, again, it goes back to that kind of initial statement about my disaffiliation with evangelicalism starting when we moved here.
Yeah,
That's not a conversation that any of my neighbors are having.
right.
So to kind of pull those things together, none of my all of my non-Christian neighbors, they look at the Roe v. Wade getting overturned and they blame that on Christians, and they don't see. There's nobody talking about what does it look like to have like a positive Christian nationalism. So to me,
Yeah,
that aggregates some of what I pay attention to and care about.
it's
It's not related to 03103 where my zip code. So I
right.
just don't care.
And I would say in my context, you're probably going to have a little more. You're going to hear a little more of that kind of conversation. Um,
Yeah, sure.
Me and Roe v. Wade. I mean, Iowa's turned. It's like Florida. Over the course of a short period
Hmm.
of time, it's gone pretty red, and it hasn't
Hmm.
historically been that way. And so, in that political milieu, in that context, you tend to hear more of those conversations taking place, which I think you make a good point. And you've said this without saying it. Pastoral ministry is very localized, right? It's about the
Sure.
person right across from you at the coffee shop or the cigar bar, right?
Yeah.
And that's what
Well,
matters.
and I think that's the problem with the whole evangelical uh, complex is it tries to be it tries to give the biblical perspective on something for all places at all times in all contexts. And I'm not saying that there aren't absolutes, but often they tend to be tangential, kind of fourth or fifth tier application
Mhm.
points made into essentials of the faith that just are not, they do not respect the priority of the localized context of the mission of Christ. And so, um, So there's that dynamic within that, but that's a part of why I don't particularly care. And I will say, just to kind of throw this out there, is like the conference thing. The idea that I have to go someplace else to get special knowledge about a perspective on a special issue and then take that special knowledge back to my local church to inform how we do things that I couldn't get without just opening my Bible and reading it, frankly, strikes me as very Gnostic understanding of biblical truth. If it's clear in the Bible, I can read it and engage with the text and critical resources to understand what exactly the Bible is saying. But if you have a special point and you're going to try to say that that is what we must know to be biblical Christians where we are, that is just modern language on a Gnostic teaching.
I agree with you. I've been to zero. I've been to maybe one national conference. It was a DG conference, and I was living in Minneapolis, and we were just going as pastoral staff because it was right down the road.
Sure.
But other than that,
yeah.
Aside from the denominational responsibilities, one. Because I agree with you on that point, and it feeds that celebrity pastor culture. Now, if someone loves going to T4G, great, that's your thing, cool. If you get edified by that, great. For me,
whatever, man, that's great.
But for me,
but it seems ridiculous to me to spend $2,000 to get 20 free books. I don't know. That just doesn't seem like a great deal to me.
Yeah.
And the messages are all free. Within 5 minutes of them being done, they're all free.
Yeah, I've never understood the appeal to those things, personally. Now, next topic that is an absolute. Ready for it?
Yeah, let's go.
You should celebrate the Lord's Day on Christmas this year. That's my absolute. Go, your turn.
No. That's I've got a lot of things to say on that.
I go for it.
The irony of this conversation, the irony of this conversation is that we are doing a Christmas Eve and Christmas Day service. I was just
you covered all your bases, man. You left no room for criticism.
Yeah, we're doing it, and so this is all in response to the Kevin DeYoung article,
right?
The thing that was interesting to me is I went back and read his article and prepped for this conversation. I mean, there's a number of things about it that just annoy me, but it does. My overall sense is that it feels like if you're working at Subway and you close up, whatever time Subway closes, 10 o'clock at night or whatever. It's like that guy knocking on the door at five minutes after closing time to say, "Hey, can you make me a sandwich?" Because he acknowledges out of the gate, he's like, "I know this may be late, and it's published on December 1st, 2016. I'm like, "Bro, late? We made this decision freaking 5 months ago. Where are you? How do you run a church calendar? We do not make decisions last minute like this." And the other part of it that is striking to me is that there's no biblical or theological argument in the article. It's straight opinion and statements. There's very little rationale from the Bible on it.
I think he does make a biblical argument in one way, but he doesn't really make it very well because it was a very brief article. It's like a 5-minute listen, if you listen to the feature. And it was his emphasis on the Lord's Day. Now, that emphasis plays well to Presbyterian ears because every Presbyterian's like, yes and amen, it's the Lord's Day. And for Baptists who have a different ecclesiology or different understanding of Sabbath, typically speaking, think about your dispensationalist Baptists.
Yeah.
They have a completely different understanding of Sabbath. Like, for example, before Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, I teach history and theology to 7th and 8th graders. And I was at the school is at a church, and it's a Baptist church, dispensational roots, bigger church. And they're having Christmas Eve service, no Christmas Day service. And I'm like, I'm not shocked. And I'm not upset. And it's not one of those things. I'm not shocked because your understanding of Sabbath is distinctly different than Kevin DeYoung's understanding of Sabbath. And
yes, I can appreciate that. However, if I recall correctly, even Calvin himself kind of basically says in the Institutes that Christians should worship on Sunday because that's what we've done and that's what the New Testament church did. But he did not. He kind of says but you could do this on any other day of the week. It's not like so. If I recall correctly, Calvin's kind of like every 7 days is kind of like the point. He doesn't even lock it in on Sunday. Um, you know,
Well,
not to
yeah,
mention the New Testament has several points where it drops into undermining the uh, sacredness of certain days. And
right.
I'm not arguing against the Lord's Day stuff. I'm just the emphasis in the New Testament is not to uh, create that type of holy mount, so to speak.
Right. And I think my only point is the understanding of Sabbath and that kind of ecclesiology is why he and other
Yeah, yeah,
Presbyterians
yeah,
are they're never gonna be like, let's do a Christmas Eve service and not go to church on Sunday. I think I wrote an article. I'm like, they'll have their Christmas Day service if a Cat 5 hurricane lands right on top of that church, because that's just what they believe. Where the Baptists are going to be like, yeah, we'll do it. We can get to it next week. Like that's fine.
yeah,
They're coming from different starting points. And so Kevin DeYoung's
yeah.
article was focused on pastors. I wrote one because I read that. Mine was focused on members. And, just I think it's just a holy responsibility of fathers and husbands in particular to be set the example for their family.
Yeah,
But I'm not legalistic, but I also want a pastor. Like this is where I think we should be leaning in toward.
yeah. And I think that the element of the article is that it presumes a certain level of culture and resources for a local church
Mm-hmm.
that I just think is unwise to assume. I mean, it's we have a church that we work with very closely here, and they rent a school building
Mm-hmm.
from one of the local schools,
Yeah.
which is honestly a bit rare in our area. And um, if they were to have a Sunday service, they would then have to also pay for somebody for the janitor staff to be there. And so even as they're kind of weighing this of like, okay, if we do a Christmas service, we then are obligating somebody to come to work on Sunday that is also Christmas Day. I don't think that's a very gracious witness to both the school or that janitorial staff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that that's a part of their reasoning for not doing a Christmas Day service, and I think that's totally valid.
Yeah, I
That
do
I
too.
think that highlights the missiology that I don't think was really present in that article. It's what was it? Jonathan Fletcher Long had a response to that. He's from the Boston area. It basically said that he's like, look, we rent our space, and our space it's either automatically closed on Sundays or
Mm-hmm.
holidays like that, or we would have to pay for staff to be there. And it's not a gracious witness to Christ to obligate them to be there on Christmas Day when it's not a holiday they celebrate.
Sure. I think that can go both ways. Well,
Yeah,
let me give the counter argument to that and then a point of agreement with you. The counter argument to that could be, as Christians, we want people to know that we indeed celebrate Christ on Christmas, right? And we're unapologetic about that. That too can be a positive witness to culture. Now, I do
sure.
hear the point of agreement would be every local church, again, talked about this earlier, is contextual, right? You have your own situation and circumstances that you have to work with. Like for Redemption Hill, the public school that we meet at is closed on the holidays, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the question becomes, what do we do? Well, we're not canceling, but we're doing it in a home, knowing
Yeah,
that's going to be a smaller group already because people are traveling and visiting, which is great.
sure.
But we're going to have fellowship. I'm going to give a short Christmas meditation, and we're going to have the Lord's Supper, and get people out a little early because it is Christmas and they have traditions. So for our context, I felt like that was an adequate response to this
Sure.
Sunday Christmas dynamic that's going on.
Yeah, I think that to that culture dynamic, I mean, there is not a we're in this interesting place in terms of American culture, where there are terms being used for the same days and times, which mean radically different things,
Mm-hmm.
whether you're a believer or not. So if you're not a Christian, Christmas doesn't mean anything. It's giftmas.
Yeah,
So
right.
okay, that's fine, but they're celebrated on the same day, and we don't have a homogenous culture, is what I mean to say. And so to make a declaration of all churches must act in this particular way as a homogenous group in an unhomogenized culture is unwise. And honestly, to throw an article like that out, like on December 1st, it then, let's say a pastor then agrees with that. Okay, then he's put in a position of having to throw a service together that was previously unplanned. That's not going to go well, and that's going to draw from his relational capital with the church. Or he's going to have members in his church who agree with that article and now feel disgruntled, embittered, or frustrated at their pastoral staff or their pastoral leadership, whether they're staff or not, for not having it. And so I don't see the win out of that article, because it's just cultivated frustration from either pastors then having to explain why they don't agree or do agree, or congregations then feeling like, am I in the biblical church? Do we do things the right way? Having that, fueling questions. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't fuel questions, but it seems ill-timed, unwise, and unhelpful, because it just creates negative feelings towards pastors. And, I just don't particularly see the benefit of that article having been done when it was done, or coming up. I mean, yeah.
If it was posted on August 1st, would you be as bothered?
No, I wouldn't be, because that's when you make the decision.
Right.
And you make the decision back in August or July if you're going to do a Christmas service. And then if it's going to be posted, then talk through, and I get really anxious, or not anxious, I just get really perturbed with biblical statements or things being couched as the biblical stance on something, when it's not so super clear from scripture. And I don't mean kind of like, well, I don't mean like they don't have biblical arguments. I just mean look, 10 Commandments are real clear. Keep your pants on with people you're supposed to have your pants on with. Don't worship idols. Don't be jealous about your brother's stuff.
Yeah.
That type of stuff. I mean, it's super clear. Love your enemy, care for your neighbors. Those things are super clear.
Keep the Sabbath.
Keep the Sabbath. That's, again,
you opened up the door on that one.
I know I did, but it's like, yeah, I think that you're accomplishing it in a relative way, whether you do it on Christmas Sunday morning or not. I just mean that that's not as locked in an exegetical argument as it's presumed to be.
Sure. And what I'm not saying is, pastor, if you're having a Christmas Eve service, not a Christmas Day service, you're in sin. That's not my angle. I don't even think Kevin DeYoung would necessarily say that. Maybe he would. I don't know, but it seems like a really harsh.
Titling your blog post a plea certainly gives it a certain tone of urgency.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I can see that, but I don't know if that's delving into sin or whatever else have you.
All I mean to say is, couch it as a case for why you should do Christmas Day service.
Yeah, a case for Christian
rather than a plea.
Just wanted to trigger you. This podcast is all about me triggering Jacob.
Oh my gosh! Here I am. I'm reading Bonhoeffer before this. I'm going to have to go back to reading Bonhoeffer about the apostate national church during his time.
I love Bonhoeffer, man. Bonhoeffer's a top 5 for me.
One of my sons is Silas Dietrich Young because of Bonhoeffer.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. I'm a huge Bonhoeffer fan. Okay, let's segue into another topic. I think there, in general, is a devaluing of our Christian holidays, Christmas and Easter. I think we can focus on that. I think we've Andy Stanley said he's unhitched from the Old Testament. I'm going to say we've unhitched from.
Sorry, when I hear somebody say that, I'm just like, Manichaeanism all over again, man. What the hell?
I know. We're doing this again, boys. Guess what? No Old Testament.
Yeah.
Woo, no Matthew.
Bro, talking about making Santa mad. Golly, gosh,
All right. So as Andy Stanley has unhitched from the Old Testament,
Sorry,
Yeah.
I, I, I have a hard time somebody saying that. Like if somebody said that to me, I'd be like, well, that's an interesting take to say while also professing to be a Christian.
All right. All right.
Like,
Let me finish.
yeah, yeah.
Now you're
Okay,
triggering me.
I'll hold back. Yeah, yeah. Sorry.
All right. So as Andy Stanley has unhitched from the Old Testament, American evangelicalism has unhitched from church history. That was what I wanted to say this whole time. And part of that is a general without knowledge of like a Christian calendar that has historically existed, a celebrating of the birth of Christ on Christmas and the resurrection of Jesus Christ on Easter, Resurrection Sunday, whatever you want to call it. And I think that's unfortunate. I've had this thought in my head. I grew up Catholic, and we had this thing called C&E Catholics, Christmas and Easter Catholics. And
Sure.
on Christmas and Easter, all these folks who hadn't gone to church the other 50 weeks of the year, they show up. And it's like,
Sure.
Even they have an understanding of these particular days we're celebrating. Now I got questions about the other 50 weeks, but
well, I'll say this just to your point. The guy from my cigar shop, and this may be a reason why to have Christmas Day service. He's asking me, "Hey, are you guys having a Christmas Day service? I don't have anything else going on. My family's all over the place."
Yeah.
And so he's coming to church on Christmas Day because we're having a Christmas Day service. Now he's come to church apart from that, so that's not unique, but that's maybe an argument for it. But and I would say maybe frame it like American evangelicalism is unhitched from the mainstream of healthy Christian tradition.
Yeah.
Rather than Christian history. Because American evangelicalism, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm married to a historian. She's going to say, but that is history. Like that, they are a part of.
They have their own history.
You know,
they're a part of history. Yeah.
I mean, and they're an extension of history. You know, I mean, in terms of why they got to where they are. You know, so
this we're making history with this podcast, Jacob. Somehow,
I'm sure.
I think the point remains. We've
I
peeled away. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say the tradition word I think is helpful because then it's a lineage of faithful believers through the centuries and how they have processed things and kind of distilled down into how we think about things in a broad sense.
Yeah. I like the word tradition, so we can roll with that. But you in our outline as we were preparing for this, you had brought up Pentecost, right? Like, I think if you're an honest reader of the Bible, you realize when you get to Acts 2 and you're reading the Gospel of John and how Jesus is talking about the promise of the Holy Spirit's going to fall upon you, and you get to Acts 2 and you're like, whoa, what's going on here? Like that is an event that should be set aside and celebrated in our churches.
Well, and Paul comments later, I've got to get back to Jerusalem in time for Pentecost. Yeah. I mean, it's within the New Testament life, the New Testament world, it was understood as kind of an anniversary that they celebrated.
Yeah, right. Even again, growing up Catholic, we had Pentecost Sunday. Nobody really knew what that meant, to be fair.
Yeah.
At least I didn't, I should say. But that day was set aside, and
sure.
I think we could think more about that. And what that does for our folks is that as we are hitching our wagon to tradition, we're actually framing the Bible for them over and over and over again, highlighting these really significant events in history that are connected to one another.
Sure. I mean, I think that's the value of the church calendar. You have, Advent is the beginning of the church calendar, and then you roll into anticipation. I can't remember what the term is for the days between the Lenten season and Advent, and then after you have Easter, you then have
ordinary time.
Ordinary time, it's called ordinary time. It's kind of Trinity terms kind of get used in there. So, we use that for our scripture readings. So we have Old and New Testament readings generally in our calendar, in our liturgy, and those pull straight from the Revised Common Lectionary for our services.
Yeah.
I do think what is our friends down, Daniel Baker and those guys down at
Cornerstone.
Cornerstone, they have a huge knockout Pentecost Sunday service for years for this very reason. I mean, they're maybe more charismatic than I am, but and it's something I've increasingly seen more discussion about having that, and I've not quite known how to line that up with our preaching. As we preach through books of the Bible, and then how do we emphasize that in a helpful way? I do feel that it should be emphasized. I mean, if there's any holiday celebrating the incarnation and celebrating the passion of Christ are not in the New Testament in terms of religious holidays. Pentecost is. I mean, I just don't do a good job of highlighting that, but that's kind of where I'm at on that stuff.
I got a close friend. He's a Presbyterian pastor here in town, and they follow tradition very much closer than we do, and hoping to move in that direction in the future. And the way he maps out his preaching calendars, they have all their holidays in, and then in between all those holidays, he plans his sermon series. And so he has his absolutes, and then he has these times in between the absolutes where he does his preaching. And
but does that just mean that he adds a Pentecost Sunday sermon? On top of Christmas and Easter, so that it's 3 as opposed to 2.
Yeah, that means that he's preaching on that. Now, how many of the holidays on the church calendar does he do? I'm not quite sure, but I know there's an emphasis there, which I appreciate a lot. And I think when you find yourself in confessional churches, you have, because you're instinctively tied toward tradition. For us, it's the 1689, at least in terms of its foundation. For my Presbyterian friend, Westminster Confession of Faith. So there's already that natural tie-in to tradition. And so why not take another step and say, okay, biblically speaking, we have these major, you can call them holidays.
Well, it's interesting to me that American evangelicalism will do like a Father's Day or Mother's Day sermon, but they won't do the other Christian holidays or a July 4th one.
Right.
I find that fascinating that those probably reflect the priorities of worship for them. This understanding of fatherhood and motherhood, which they're biblical concepts. Obviously, they're inherent to God's design and all that. I'm not dissing on that, but to go out of your way to make it a Christian worship service with an entire sermon on those things, but not on the Father sending the Son dying in our place, the Spirit proceeding from the Father and the Son, those Trinitarian dynamics. I think what the church calendar does is it invites us to live around God's story rather than this American evangelicalism one, which is based around these sort of political punditry points.
Right. I don't preach 4th of July is just another Sunday for me. Mother's Day is another Sunday for me. Father's Day is just another Sunday for me. Now, I have no problem giving a nice little gift to your fathers and saying something encouraging, but
Bro, I always forget. I will even make a note to say something, and I'll get up there and I'll forget it.
Don't care about you fathers.
I just don't. Yeah, it's funny, for all the ways in which I would come across as an iconoclast, I would probably perfectly fit in that sort of, Presbyterian mindset.
Yeah. So we've been going through the Sermon on the Mount in 2022, and this text landed on Father's Day, just in God's providence. This is what I had to preach on Father's Day, and it was fantastic. I can't make this up. Matthew 5:27. You have heard that it is said, you should not commit adultery. But I say that anyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery. I was like, yes, that's the passage I'm going to preach on Father's Day.
Yeah. Did you go on Mark Driscoll on that? How dare you?
Not quite close. I mean, I made me the guts to the edge. That's good. So this is what I want to do, Jacob. If that's okay. You got a few more minutes?
Bro, I got time.
So let's do this. I'm going to pause, and what I'm going to do is we're gonna stop this. We're going to do a part 2 podcast, and we're going to get into, I think, some topics where, basically the topics I want to get into, the nature of sermon preaching, and then pastoral burnout and its connection to 2020. That's a very real thing.
Sure.
So for those of you who are listening, if you want to check out part 2, it'll be uploaded soon, or it might be uploaded if you get this a little later. And I think you want to hear what Jacob has to say regarding those topics. So with that said, thanks for listening. Make sure you like, share, do all the relevant things, and we appreciate you listening to Cornfield Theology.
You're listening to an audio resource from Redemption Hill Church. This resource is not meant to be a replacement for participation at a local church, but an accessory to the care you're receiving from your own pastors. To learn more about Redemption Hill Church or to give to our ministry, visit redemptionhilldsm.org.